Hey coders, this is Ben, the founder and CEO of Holoscribe, and welcome you back to some more Codecademy for schools. I hope you enjoyed your first week where we learned the basics of HTML and are set and ready to go for your next week's challenges. Before we get into this week's topics, let's just do a quick recap of what we went through on Codecademy in the last week. The focus of last week's topics was learning about HTML elements, structure, and the building blocks of a website. You would have been taken through some of the very basic elements that go into making up a HTML file, elements like paragraphs and headings, how you open and close those with tags, and how you can put content into each of those elements. We looked at the fact that every HTML file has a body, and it's within that body that you can put in your different HTML elements, such as paragraphs. As we went through the lesson, you began to add more and more different types of elements. You added headings like H1, H2, and H3, paragraphs, you added divs, you even added in spans. You were also shown how to put in some line breaks to push text further down the page. It went on further to be able to add in multimedia, such as videos and images, as well as creating ordered or unordered lists, where ordered lists are numbers like 1, 2, 3, and unordered lists are more like bullet points. In the second part of the lesson, looked at the fact that every HTML file is defined by a declaration at the top, doc type HTML, that a HTML is always wrapped in HTML element, open and closing tags. You looked at things like a site title and where that would then appear in a web browser. We learned all about linking to external links on the website, linking to other pages, or linking somewhere else on the same page using an ID. You looked at how to space and lay out your HTML so it's much cleaner and easier to read using indentation, starting elements on new lines. You even looked at how you can add in comments, which is a really handy way for you or other developers to be able to read later. By the end of all this, you should be now comfortable to be able to create a HTML document by adding in the docutype, the HTML opening and closing tag, the body opening and closing tag, even a HTML title for the page. And then inside your body, adding in headings, paragraphs, even some inline styling of the paragraphs, such as bold or italics, being able to add in bullet points, numbered lists, images, videos, and to take that HTML, link different elements to external links or to other parts of the page. We're now going to take this further. We're going to start to look at some other, a bit more complex elements that you can put into a HTML page. This way, we're going to cover 2 units on Codecademy. We're going to look at tables and forms. If you're finding your way back into Codecademy, make sure you've logged in. We're going to provide you with all the links that you need. But essentially, if you go to your learning page, you should be able to see that your Introduction to HTML course, you're about 33% of the way through it. And that the next lesson is on tables. To continue into that lesson, you can click Resume. Or if you click on the Introduction to HTML heading, you'll be taken to your overall syllabus of this course. And what you should see is that next to all the pages that aren't part of the Pro package, so all the free courses, that you now have 100% next to Introduction to HTML and HTML document standards. If you then scroll down the page and expand out a little bit more, you'll be able to see the lessons that we're going to cover this week. Under tables, there's just one. It's an interactive lesson about HTML tables. When you then move on to forms, you're going to be finding out about HTML forms, as well as a very short lesson on form validation. That's your target for this week. And as I said, all the links to these will be provided to you, or you can go to your learning page on Codecademy and click through from there. So before you go, get into your Codecademy, let's just cover a few of the basics. First of all, what is a table in HTML? A HTML table is a way of presenting information to users where columns and rows are used. I want to show you a few real examples of where tables are used today. So here we are now. I'm on a website called Macworld. It talks about all different computers and upcoming versions and software and things like that that are coming out. And if we scroll down, we can see that there's a table of contents here on the page. The way we know it's a table is because in this one block of elements, 2 columns, so some information on the left and some on the right of the table, and we have 5 rows of information. Another use of table that you see very, very commonly on any website that's trying to sell you different packages or software licenses, here is a table that is a pricing table. So you can see we've got some row at the top that tells us the different package names with some pricing. We've got another row that does some lists there that shows us what you get in each package. We also have some columns. So we have 3 columns here showing that there are an individual package, a family package, and a student package. So as we can see, the table with its rows and columns help to lay out the information in a much more effective way. So tables are very useful and very important when building HTML pages. One thing that I just want to point out as you do your HTML table lesson is that there is one activity in there where you get asked to go and style the heading of your table using the CSS file. So I want to explain quickly what this is. And to do it, I'm going to jump across to my Codecademy lesson on HTML tables. So you'll see that it's the very last activity that you get asked to do in your HTML tables lesson for this week, styling with CSS. In the coming weeks, we're going to learn all about CSS and how it's a powerful language that can be used to style the elements in your HTML page. But for this week, with it being introduced just to help us style one part of our table, I just want to explain the basics of how a HTML file and a CSS file work together. Looking in our HTML, we can see down on row 6 that there is a link there to a file called style.css. The type of file is a CSS file or a text CSS file. And it's saying here that it's the style sheet to use, which essentially means, hey, HTML file, this file over here is going to tell you what the elements on your page need to look like. Now, whereas your previous activity, you only had the HTML file to work in, now Codecademy has introduced different tabs at the top where we can swap between index.html and style.css. As I mentioned, in the coming weeks, we're going to learn all about CSS, how to build our own from scratch, how to use it to do all different types of styling. But for this activity, all it's going to ask you to do is to look for some element IDs, in this case, an ID called TH and an ID called TD. Now, bear in mind that these IDs are the same IDs that the HTML file is using to identify some of the elements in there. And the CSS file is now calling those TH and TD elements and applying some styles to it, like what font family it should use, what font weight it should use. And the activity you're being asked to do is to go into the CSS file, find where that ID combination, TH and TD, are mentioned, and then add in a font size of 18 pixels. The instructions will walk you all through it, but I just wanted to make sure we understood at a really basic level the relationship between a HTML file and a CSS, and how during this activity in Codecademy to use the tabs at the top to flick between the HTML and the CSS file. So the last thing to talk about before we get into this week's Codecademy exercises is to also mention what is a HTML form. A HTML form, also known as a web form, is basically a form made up of different fields that allows a user to enter data. And more often than not, that data is then captured and sent somewhere for saving. Let's have a look at some real life examples. We all know this page, Google. It's a search engine. It is one of the most famous web forms in the world with only one field, a search field. But it's an excellent example of one use of a very simple web form. Another example of the types of forms you see a lot of on the website are sign-in forms. So we can see here we've got a form. It's got 2 fields, one for a phone number, username, or email, and one for a password. Another type of really common form is a register form. Sometimes these are short, sometimes they're long, but each field asks for different types of information that the user enters in, and when they click next or save or sign up or whatever the button tells them to do, it takes that information and it sends it somewhere. So after you finish going through your HTML table lesson, you'll be taken through how to build your very own web forms in HTML with all the different field types that there are. You'll then have one final and very short lesson that talks about form validation. Now, form validation basically means applying rules to the different fields in your form. For example, some of your form fields, let's say a username, you might want to make sure that everyone who wants to fill in your form has to fill that out. In other words, it's required. For some fields, you might want to restrict it that people can only enter in numbers, or you might want to say that one field has to have a minimum of 5 characters and a maximum of 15 characters. There's lots of things that field validation will do, and Codecademy will take you through the types of field validation that you can do with your HTML web forms. One final piece that I just want to explain that you're going to come up against as you begin to build your forms in HTML this week. You'll see that when you go to add your form element, you get told to add action and method attributes to your form elements that you add into your HTML. So I just wanted to quickly explain what these are used for so that it doesn't become confusing when you do your activities. Action and method attributes are actually quite simple. The action attribute tells the form, this is where I want you to send the information. It's like an email address. When you create an email, you write your email letter, but you also have to put an address to say, hey, when I click send, this is where I want that email message to be taken. The action attribution of a HTML form is just the destination address of where the form's content is going to be sent. The method is telling the form how it wants to send the information. Now, as we get into more advanced forms, you'll find that there's lots of different methods that are used in different situations. The main one we're going to use, in fact, the one you're going to be taught in this lesson this week, is the post method. But the easiest way to understand how the method attribute works is it's like saying, I got a package for my friend, and there's lots of different ways I could deliver it. I can ask them to come and pick it up. I can book in a courier who can come and grab it and take it to their address, or I can go and I can post it in a mailbox and it will be delivered to the address that I put on the top. And that, in essence, is the types of web forms we're going to build. We have a method attribute that in these examples tells it to post, just like posting a letter, and the action attribute that says this is where we want to post it to. So when you come to this activity of adding in your form elements and you get asked to add an action and a method, that's the basic explanation of what they're used for. It should be very simple for you to follow the instructions to add them in and get into building and validating your HTML web forms. So that's it for this week. You have 3 lessons. You've got your HTML tables, you've got your HTML forms, and your form validation. So get into them. And as always, if you get stuck, if you have any questions, whether it's about the tables, the forms, or even last week's elements and structures to HTML, feel free to send the questions to your teacher. They'll pass them on to us. If during the week we can answer them, we will. Otherwise, we'll try and collect the questions and make sure we answer them in next week's video. Other than that, enjoy your coding and we'll speak to you next week.